Howdy folks, just a follow-up to the SmartGrip Neewer app for the Nikon D7100 as well as the D7200. So as I mentioned in a follow-up message in the first video, I did get it working with a Samsung device, but incidentally I finally got my own Android device as well, and this is going to be the full in-depth review. Again, this is for the Neewer MD-D15 SmartGrip app. It's basically an MD-D15 clone, with the exception that this also has an application you can install on your smartphone to remotely trigger, as well as some additional functionalities which I'll cover later. So I finally got off my lazy butt and added some diffusers to the lighting I was using, so hopefully now I won't see that garish glare off my skin tone, so it won't be so distracting since it's a high contrast between typical objects I review, which tend to be black. I don't know why, the flashlight, the grips, the cameras, but whatever. Anyway, getting back into the grip itself. First off, the typical thing I like to highlight is, again, for those who are looking into aftermarket grip, why would you want to get one? Well, obviously, there's the cost. But then with the cost comes the concern about the quality, whether or not one of these are good enough in terms of its build and whether it will last, if there are any weaknesses. Now, I've actually reviewed quite a few of these now that I'm pretty familiar with what weak points to look for. Especially if you haven't seen, I just recently posted a follow-up to the DSTE's MD-D15 grip. Please take a look at that, because what I had highlighted was that this particular connector was not bolted down within. I'll get into this one later, but just really quickly, that connector wasn't bolted down properly within. Thus, it was creating pressure when you were pulling it out of the camera, because this fit pretty snug, and it created weak points for these two screw mounts here, and that actually snapped and broke. So the DST15, unfortunately, dropping it down from 4 out of 5 stars to 2 out of 5 stars. So getting into quality really quickly, typical things I would like to cover is whether the rubber meets with the plastic portions flush, and for the most part it does, although you could tell it doesn't quite fit as nicely as, say, on Nikon's original grip. Now, I don't have their MD-D15, though I do have their MD-D16, and right off the bat you could see there is the difference. Everything is sub-millimeters in terms of, like, say, if there are gaps whatsoever, but this one you could actually see that there are distinct gaps between where the rubber meets the plastic portion. And here's a part where they just kind of like cut it wrong or whatever because of this curve. So the only reason I ever highlight this is because that speaks to the overall quality control and what are the differences that you're getting for the extra money of original versus the aftermarket. That part right there, as you can see, it's almost like the machine cut it off ever so slightly wrong. There's a raised rubber there, but for the most part, nothing glaringly wrong. Now, if there was one thing I did want to point out, which I also highlighted in my first vid, was that this portion here is not mounted directly to the plastic frame itself. It's almost like they had too much rubber, so when you press here, you could likely hear that sound, and for OCD types, I'd imagine that would drive you nuts. I don't know if over time maybe this will flare up or whatnot, so that's one thing to consider. Now, incidentally, this is the second grip that I had that also exhibited this issue. The first one I returned because I thought perhaps it was just a problem with the iOS app, but it turns out that the second one also has a problem with the iOS app, but as mentioned, it also has that same exact problem. To be fair, this is another one of their grips. This is actually the MD-D16 clone, and no such problems with this grip there. So I don't know if it was a bad batch that I got off of the MD-D15, but for what it's worth, I'm just highlighting that. I'll get into the teardown later, but so far, again, button has nice detents. This one actually doesn't feel mushy like on the DST grip. These main command dial and sub command dials, as is typical with these aftermarket, is just purely plastic, and this particular one actually doesn't have a particularly good friction or tack to it, so very easy, especially in the wintertime when you got dry skin. It's very hard to turn this dial, and it just doesn't feel as nice and as polished as the original Nikon grip. The main command dial is a little bit better. It's got much better detent than, say, this one. It just feels poorly implemented by comparison. Now the shutter button, I like this because it has a very nice detent and full stop where you are focusing. So that click right there that you're listening to, I don't know, maybe some might not like it, but I actually like the fact, not the click itself, but rather just the fact that there is a very strong detent that when you first half press, it stops right there. and then you go full press. So there's very two distinct stops, whereas on a certain grip I felt like it was just mushy, it was too easy to take a picture versus focusing, so that's a nice plus. Now this lock button here actually functions very nicely. It's got a nice detent and does operate overall smoothly. So far not too bad. I would say quality 4 out of 5, but that's ostensibly. Again, I'll break this open to see how that is overall. Now I'm going to go ahead and get this mounted to a D7100, although I will cover the 7200 later as well. In my first video I did highlight that as I was attaching the grip to the body, I didn't see that green confirmation light there. Now the reason I found out why is because I didn't have a SD card installed, and it turns out that if you don't have the SD card installed, that light won't go on. So case in point, I'm going to actually pop out the SD card, leave it out, and go ahead and mount the grip. And typically you should see that green confirmation light turn on once it does make contact. So right now that is fully installed tight. So I'm going to try that again, get that disconnected, but this time I'm going to have the SD card mounted. Okay, get that connected. There, you saw that? So I'm not sure why that is. I guess probably doesn't acknowledge it if you don't have the card, because it figures, hey, you're not going to be taking pictures anyway, so I don't know. It's just one of those Nikon implementation. So with the grip installed, just going to do a quick check on the flexibility of it, because your main gears that you're adjusting are right here, but that screw is aligned pretty much close to the center. However though, because your predominant weight that you're going to apply the pressure on is up here, mainly when you're using in portrait mode, just wanted to see like how much flex there is here. And as you can see there is some amount of flex, but I'd imagine that would be the same case with the original Nikon as well. Although, of course, if anyone has a original MD-D15 and care to chime in, please, by all means, dump it in a comment. But I would say that it's pretty much on par with, like, say, the DST brand that I had tested. But it does feel solid enough that I don't have any concerns like this is going to separate or anything like that. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to test the lock mode. As you can see, the shutter is locked out. This multi-selector button is not working. Neither the main command dial, actually let me dump this into manual, main command dial or the sub-command dial. Okay, let's kick it out of lock. I'm going to put that into live mode and go ahead and use that cap as a focal point. And there, the shutter button is working properly. Okay, no problems there. I'm going to go ahead and test the auto exposure, auto lock button. And there on the bottom corner you can see that. Secondly, we're going to reprogram that button and at the same time test out this joystick, and that would be in the menu, and that would be under F9, assign MD-D15 button. Let's just make that into autofocus on button, since a lot of people prefer that. Okay, I'm going to go back onto there and using this that we just reprogrammed. It's interesting, it's not really focusing, but yet it's giving me that confirmation beep, but it could be because of the angle that I'm at. But bottom line is that that does work. I'm able to reassign it, so no issues there. So now we're going to go ahead and test the main command dial. Main command dial feels very clunky. It's like, it's not very precise, and I kind of feel it's skipping if I'm going too fast, so it's going to give a deductive mark there. Sub-command dial feels a little bit smoother. It doesn't have as nice a detent. It's almost like it's overpoweringly strong, so it's kind of stopping my finger. The friction is a little too strong. But the sub-command dial does operate fairly smoothly, although not the most precise feeling. I do kind of feel it's skipping jumps as I'm going too fast for it. So I'm going to deduct marks for that there. But in the end, it does function perfectly fine, as long as you're not going too fast. So one thing I actually do want to check right now is the confirmation of the batteries. So right now you can see that it's highlighted that I'm drawing from the D7100 first instead of the MD-D15. I'm going to go ahead and flip that. That's under menu D13 on the D7100. Come over here and let's just say, tell it, use the MD-D15 first. Come back here, let's verify. Okay, as you can see, it's selecting from MD-D15, 51 shots. Took a picture, come back in here, confirm, 52 shots. Now let's do the reverse and tell it to use the D7100 first. And this is where I find that there's a bug with this grip. So here, you can see that I told it D7100. Okay, confirmed. It went back out the menu. I'm going to come back out one more. Come in here to the battery info, but the D7100 is not highlighted. Now, if I remove the battery from the grip, force it to default to the D7100, that's the only way I've been able to get around it. So that's one bug so far that I confirmed on this grip, which does not exhibit on the MD-D16. Unfortunately, the DST no longer works, so I can't confirm if that happens as well. But in my upcoming leak review, I'll confirm if that's a bug there as well. But anyway, for now, that's one bug. So one problem I did want to revisit was that in my original DST review, I had highlighted the fact that the Sigma lens caused compatibility problems. This was their 17-70 f2.8 through 4.0 lens, and what happened was that when you were previewing an image and you were zoomed in and you try to scroll around, it would freeze every once in a while. As you can see, it is moving, but very slowly. And some people highlighted, well, that's because your lock was on at the time, but that wasn't the case. As you saw there, I didn't have it locked, and I can't be emphatic enough that that lock only impacts your autofocus selection point. It does not impact this by itself, because if it did, you would not be able to make selection choices here as well. And you clearly see that I do have it on lock, but it does not impact my ability to navigate around. So that's not the reason why. But strangely enough, if I come back here again, zoom in, of course, now it does work. So I don't know if that's a workaround, but that was a known bug. So let me go ahead and press playback again, zoom in, and there you can see it has that problem again. And the DST actually did overcome it. It didn't have a problem with the joystick, but it looks like this Neewer grip is also impacted by it as well, as can be seen there. But anyway, slight segue for those with Sigma lenses. So I verified that all the functionality works. This joystick seems to work pretty fine, and as a matter of fact, this one doesn't have the same problem that DST did, where I kind of felt like I would accidentally both, as I'm making a selection here, I would accidentally push down on it. So this one actually does feel very, very good, almost like Nikon's original grip. So that pretty much covers the basic functionality of the grip itself. Now we're going to get into the application portion of it. So Neewer does provide this little card that does have a barcode on it, so you could scan it to install the application. And that actually brings it to a link, so I'm going to tell it to open up in the browser. Incidentally, I did have problems trying to get to it. I don't know why, for whatever reason it is. It just wouldn't work, the installation. So if you're running into the same problem as I am, just simply go to the Google Play Store and do a search for Shutter BLE, which is incidentally the first one right there. Click on that, press search, and it's the first app that returns here. I already have it installed, so that's why it's there, but I'm going to go ahead and launch it now. So allow phone connects to device with Bluetooth open. I mean, this is part of their English, so turning on my Bluetooth. Now the grip, as I had highlighted, doesn't need a battery installed within it. It could be powered by the camera itself or the battery that's within the grip. But bottom line is it must be connected to the camera in order for this device to find it. I'm going to go ahead and press connect, searching for the device. See the MAC address, go ahead and press on SmartGrip. It says connect success, done. Just go ahead and power the camera on. I want to be very clear about the limitations of this application. Its sole purpose is to act as a remote control. It's not like, say, a program where you could actually acquire an image directly on here. It's purely a remote control that operates your camera via the grip. So as you can see here, there are four main functionalities. There's a shutter, multi, bulb, and delay. There is actually also the stopwatch thing, which I'll get into later, but in its most basic form, the shutter, it's just a simple remote control. The minute you touch this and pull it down slightly, it'll start focusing the camera, the lens, and then once you reach down here, it'll go ahead and take the picture. Now, one thing to highlight is that it does not override whatever settings you have on your dial. You pretty much need to adjust all the settings that you want. And again, like I said, just treat it as a dumb remote. That's all it does. Okay, you slide your finger and it'll start hunting for focus. And once it does, confirm, bring it down, let go, takes the picture. Now the thing that you'll note is that there is a delay from the time I hit the center until it actually takes the picture there. I'm not sure what really contributes to that. Let me just go ahead and dump this in single, put in aperture priority again. Alright, just simply takes a shot right there, but there is a slight delay. If I wanted to shoot continuously, you can't, like, say, press and hold here and expect the camera to shoot continuously. In shutter mode, it's just a one shot. Now, finishing off the compatibility testing on the camera, the shutter will work in quiet mode. Same as usual, acquire your focus. The delay takes a shot. Now here's an interesting thing. You can actually use it in conjunction with the self-timer delay on the camera. Although this does have its own self-timer delay function here, the thing is that this does not give you any audio or visual cues. So it may be helpful if, like, say you were taking a family portrait or whatever where you needed that audio cue. Then you would dump this into the self-timer mode, acquire your focus, go ahead and take your shot. Understand though that this has its own slight delay because, you know, again, shutter mode, I don't know why, maybe it's on purpose because they probably figure you want to look natural after you flip the shutter button here to take a picture. Again, I'll get into a workaround for that later, but the point is that if you're trying to do a self-timer thing, again, there's the delay of this plus that. Now you just heard the sound of that fake shutter on the Asus because for the most part I've actually shut off the sound, but I'll get into that as well later. Now the last one is the mirror up. Mirror up function, as you know, is when you want to take a perhaps long exposure and you want to absolutely minimize any vibration that you get from the mirror slap. Acquire your focus, take your shot, but you gotta remember the first one actually will flip the mirror up. Your second shot will actually go ahead and take the picture. You see? Now, about that shutter delay, a workaround for that is you could go into your multi-mode, or pretty much your multi-bulb or delay, come back into your single shot, or whichever one of these modes that you have wanted on the camera. There is absolutely no delay here. The moment you acquire focus and you bring it down, you see that? It's immediate, it just takes a picture right there. Likewise, for the bulb mode, you're going to come into bulb mode, go into bulb auto, program this for 0 seconds, acquire your focus, bam, it's instant. Last but not least, your delay, likewise, program this delay to 0 milliseconds. So thereby, that's your workaround for the delay that's inherent in the shutter mode. Like I said, I don't know if it was intentional, but kind of annoying. I wish they would have given you an option to either do away with that delay, because sometimes, you know, like I said, you're used to having a remote respond instantly, but here again, you have this little delay. Now the multi-functionality is used in conjunction with your continuous low or your continuous high. So I'm going to first set it on CL. And I'll keep taking for as long as you keep your finger there. As soon as you let go, it stops. Let's go ahead and go to continuous high. As soon as you let go, done. So that's used in conjunction with that. The multi will not work if you went back to your single shot. It'll just strictly take one shot. So again, it has to be a conjunction of the app working with the correct settings of the camera. It does not override it. Now we're going to go touch upon the bulb mode. In bulb mode, you'll notice that there are two functionality. One is called bulb auto and the other is bulb manual. In auto mode, it's almost got like a timer. So you could say, I want this exposure to be for 5 seconds. But there again, lies the issue where you need to set the correct setting. So in case you want to shutter priority or your manual mode, and then you're going to adjust your shutter to be bulb right there. So in auto, it's just simply slide down. Again, confirm focus, bring it down. And you can see that there's a countdown timer there. Boom. So rather than you trying to time it yourself, you have a more precise control over here of exactly how long you want the exposure for your bulb to be. Manual just simply means for as long as your finger is there, right? Hold it longer. That's manual control. One final note about the bulb mode before we move on is that I wish they had incorporated into this a actual shutter emulation, but I figure I kind of understand why they didn't, because this is connected via Bluetooth. Bluetooth itself does have an inherent latency. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think standard latency is in a few hundred milliseconds. Of course, you Bluetooth wizards out there, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but regardless though, there is an inherent latency in the Bluetooth connection. That's why aptX came out with a low latency that I think is on the order of like less than 50 milliseconds or something like that. Again, that's off the top of my head. I don't remember correctly, but the thing is that you have to remember that because this is triggered via Bluetooth, that delay does contribute to the overall chain of you sending a command and the camera actually accepting and acting on it. Now, case in point is tracking your overall chain of command from the moment you try to acquire focus. Now, I won't, because I put this in manual mode since I leaned it down on the lens, and up into the moment that you actually trigger the shot, and it sends a end signal to end the shutters. Right? So all of that timing is actually done here and then being passed on to here. Because you gotta remember, you're in bulb mode, so it's simulating your finger on the actual shutter on the camera. Thereby, whatever latency there is between this and that, even though I set this for 2 seconds, the exposure value here came out to 1.8. So that was actually a little bit faster. I would have expected it to be longer, but overall, you could kind of mimic. And that's why I have this chart here to translate what your D7100/7200 shutter should be in equivalent of your seconds/milliseconds over here. It's not perfect because, like I said, yesterday night when I was testing it, it worked fine down into maybe about half a second. Anything below that, I guess the inherent latency of the Bluetooth really kicked in and caused it to be of a longer exposure than what I had initially timed here. But from about 1 second onwards, it's pretty concise in that whatever I programmed, that was the exposure value that was taken in bulb mode. So it would be pretty cool to see them expand on this. Again, I don't know if they could cut down on the latency. Perhaps they could take advantage of aptX, but regardless though, bulb mode was never really designed for short exposure values. They tend to be for long exposure for creative purposes, but it would have been pretty cool if they had kind of like a shutter emulator mode via the bulb mode. That would have been a very cool workaround here. Now your delay, this is just something like a countdown timer. You could program it from a minimum of 1 second to a maximum of 99 hours, although I don't know why in the world you would want to, but in case you want to take a picture of the future, I want to take a shot 99 hours and 59 minutes and 59 seconds into the future. Click finished. And that's confirm of the focus, and after that countdown, your camera will take that shot. For our purposes right now, let's just go ahead and say you don't want that. There's that cancel button up there. Click on cancel. So let's just say you got a taking and family shot. You could just use a simple shuttle mode, or if you want to make sure that everybody's ready and you got your hand down more naturally, you won't want your smartphone to appear in the picture, you want to shove it in your back pocket, you figure you give yourself 3 seconds, come finish. Dump that into your back pocket, look natural, bam, shot's taken. So that is one exception to the rule where this actually overrides because the timing is being done here. The camera doesn't realize it, right? It's not like you're telling the camera to wait. The application is waiting to send the shutter trigger rather than taking the command from C3, because as you can see, I was in a single shot mode and not in the self-time mode anyway. So that's one exception to the rule where I said that they have to work in conjunction, whereby the delay mode is solely handled by the application itself before it'll send the shutter trigger signal to the camera. Now the last part is this stopwatch icon here, which I liken to an intervalometer, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but click on the plus sign there. You could pretty much program it to the exact date, time, how long you want the exposure to be. So this interval is how long it waits between the shots, and then the total amount of shots. So for those into astrophotography or whatever have you that you want to do that, but of course you got to keep in mind your camera has to be able to have enough juice. So hopefully you have a either powered or a second battery or whatever, so it will have enough juice to last through however much you're going to program. It's a little bit beyond for me to cover that in here, but for flexibility wise, I will test that offline and get back to you with my comments on how well that has worked, but that is the last functionality within here. And aside from that, the other functionality within here is you can select the language between English or Chinese. And you could run an update here, although it says it's the latest version, so that's not working, but that's pretty much the application in a nutshell. Now, one final note before we move on from this application portion is, for the most part of this review, I had the sound turned off. The reason for that is because it gives you this fake shutter sound. Really? I mean, first of all, your camera doesn't even fire that fast. This thing's like a little machine gun, you know? It's like, it's crazy. But of course, I mean, I do have that in bow mode, but fine, okay? Let's go into shutter, and let's just go ahead and bump this to your fastest, which is 1/8,000th of a second. But even so, it's just hilarious, you know? It's just like, I wish they had programmed in an option to give you the ability to shut that sound off, because you may still want to keep your smartphone sound on. It's just that you don't want this application to annoy you with those fake shutter noise. So here, just for you check. Alright, that wraps up the Smart App portion of this review. For those D7200 owners who would like to confirm that this grip does work, as you can see there, it verified that it made connection with the grip. I'm going to first test the lock button very quickly. Make sure that it doesn't work. None of these. You come back in here and just verify the battery like we did. I'm actually going to take this off lock now and use the joystick here. First we're going to verify the battery information. You can see it's pulling off the MD-D15. I'm going to go ahead and get out of there, come back into the shooting display, and go into the battery order here. Tell it to use the D7200 first. See if it has that bug. Yep, so same problem on the 7200. It has that bug where you tell it to pull it from 7200 first, it won't. So the only real workaround is to just kind of force it to acknowledge it by yanking out the MD-D15's battery. Now we're going to go ahead and test all the functionality of the buttons. Put this into live view mode. Go ahead and take that picture. No problem with the shutter. Put this into manual. Make sure that the main command dial so you can see they're pretty accurate. Though it kind of feels like if you go too fast, it actually does skip a few. So let's start at 1.4. I'm going to trigger it really fast a few times. That only made 2 jumps, even though I was more like 3 or 4 clicks, but yeah. So it's not as accurate as, like, say, the DST one. So I took it off of auto ISO, and now we're going to go ahead and test the shutter. It's okay, but it still kind of feels like it's missing a few if you're scrolling too fast. So both the main command dial and the sub-command dial feature that problem. Now we're going to go ahead and test this auto exposure lock button. As you can see there, no problem there. I'm going to reassign that button to the autofocus on, and that would be the F10 on the D7200. Set that as the autofocus on. Go ahead and test that out. Yep, no problem there, works fine. And the joystick, while scrolling through a picture, no problems there. So all functionality works as intended, with the exception, like I said, the battery pull bug as well as the main and sub command dials not being as good as they should be. So now I'm going to test the application. I'm not going to go in depth here because I already did that in the 7100, so if you want the finite details, please go in there. But pretty much the application works in conjunction with your settings on the camera. It doesn't necessarily override it, with the one exception being the delay, which I'll cover when I get there. But again, shutter is basically its most simple mode. Just verify that it works. Once it acquires focus, it takes a shot. If you want to take multi-capture, switch it to continuous low or continuous high. One initial pull starts focusing. Pull and hold, continuous low. Flip it over to continuous high. Okay, that all works. So now I'm going to go ahead and test the bulb mode. Program in the exposure time of 2 seconds. Bam, done. Go to bulb manual. I'm going to depress and hold past the 3-second mark. There you go, let go. That works. Let's go into the delay. Now the delay, I'm still in a single shot mode. I'm just going to go ahead and bump this into aperture priority. As mentioned again, I'm going through this really fast in the interest of time, but if you want in-depth of this, please go back to the D7100 section. Countdown timer, done. So all the functionality works. The stopwatch icon functions as an intervalometer. It's a bit much to go over here, but I'll report back how well this functions in the future, but pretty much you can program shooting date, your time, how long the exposure should be, the interval between your shots, and the total number of shots there. So that verifies that this grip does work fine on a D7200 as well, as you can see there, with the exception being the battery priority as well as the main command dial and the sub command dial losing clicks as you're going too fast. So doing a quick comparo of the features versus the actual Nikon grip, albeit a MD-D15, right off the bat you can see, of course, they cheaped out. There is no weatherproofing around this edge here as it is available on the Nikon grip. As you can see there, there's this nice weatherproofing on the MD-D15 versus nada on this grip. Now on the MD-D15 there is that rubber grommet there to provide additional weather sealing for the connector. This one does feature it too, although it's very, very thin, as you can see there. Now again, I don't know if there was a design change between the MD-D15 and 16, but for what it's worth, there it is. A note is that pairing into the tube, there is that metal base on the MD-D16. This provides your support for when you're mounting it onto a tripod. This does have it as well, although this does feel a bit thinner than Nikon's original. As for the trays itself, not too much different, although this fits nice and flush, whereas on the Neewer grip, it does seem to protrude out a little bit. Interestingly enough, they slapped a Bluetooth sticker on the tray itself, although that circuitry is not actually built in here, it's actually within here, so if anything, I feel like they should have stuck it on there, but whatever. Anyway, one last note is that the compatibility. So with DSTE's grip, their battery tray, the lithium ion or the AA, swapped interchangeably between the two. But one annoying thing I've noticed is that the original EN-EL14 will not actually fit in here. It goes in, but there's something different about the structure over here that it won't actually go in, and so that you could close it. It's annoying because, you know, you figure if you had additional lithium ion trays while you're shooting, you could easily swap it in and out and you could purchase additional ones. But of course, you could probably reach out for a Neewer brand version. Now, the Neewer one does fit into Nikon's grips. As you can see there, it goes all the way in, locks tight, does work. It's just, it won't work the other way around. Closing out in terms of the accessory, here's the 6 AA tray. And one note about this is that from time to time I am asked questions about what type of batteries you would recommend, or just in general like battery questions. Do me a favor, please go into my MD-D16 review into the dedicated section called Battery Considerations. Use the TOC in the video description to access that, or access this link right here, because I do cover it in depth, so that should give you a general idea of what batteries you use, what you can expect in terms of how many pictures you can take with the original EN-EL15 versus, like, say, alkaline or a top of the level nickel metal hydride like the Eneloop XX, or I think they call them differently now, but that should give you a pretty good idea of what to expect. Now, if you actually need the original Excel spreadsheet for that, just drop in a comment and I'll be happy to send that to you. So now we're going to go ahead and take this apart just to see what makes it tick inside, and as well as identifying any potential weak points of this grip. So now that I've got that cover popped off, I can see that there is no weather sealing around here as on the original Nikon grips, but a little bit disconcerting is the fact that while this plate has been my primary focus, because there have been reported instances where, because it does lift off, since some of them were held down by plastic or whatnot, and when you over tighten it, it pulled up. This is held down by metal screws, and it is bolted down to plastic post on the grip itself, but it seems like this plate is just feels very cheap as compared to like even DST's or Nikon's brand, and doesn't feel very substantial. But of more alarm is the fact that these gears are not held in place by posts or gears. It just seems like it's punched metal bar, so I don't know how strong that'll be. So not too thrilled to see that, but of even more important significance, which I recently discovered thanks to a DST grip failure, is right here. Now look at how easy that came off. It's just a simple tug, that's it. Reason being that this is the main connector that goes into the camera. It's simply held by these two little prongs here on either end, to there, to there. Now why that's significant is because this does attach into the camera kind of snug. So as you're pulling it out of the camera, because it is not properly held down, like say on the MD-D15, it's actually located differently. It's here. It was actually held down by 3 screws on a base metal plate, so it was held down nice and tight to pretty beefy plastic posts. But here, as you can see, it's just pretty much as you're pulling it down, all that force is going to cause it to pull up as you're pulling it off the camera. Then it's going to exert all that pressure onto this faceplate, and thus these 2 screws here on the DST failed. So not thrilled to see this design. Now I don't know if this was an inherent design flaw of the original MD-D15 grip, because in general these clones mimic pretty closely, especially the DST brand that I could see, they mimic pretty closely the original grip. So again, I don't have original MD-D15, but I could tell you right off the bat that I would not recommend this grip over long term for the simple fact of this combined with that. Now, if you are still set on purchasing this grip because of the Smart App functionality, the only thing I could suggest is that as you're removing it off the camera, make sure that your thumb applies pressure here, so that way you're kind of holding on to this top plate, and as you're pulling it off, all that pressure that comes from here exerting upward force on this faceplate, you've got your thumb here to mitigate that risk of this screw and that screw cracking off. Aside from that though, I mean, the solder work seems to be pretty good. I don't see any cold solder joints like say on the MD-D16, Nikon's original that is. One curious thing is that there is no wire here that kind of sends a detection signal as you insert the battery tray, as with the DST brand. Normally when this scrolls up, you see that lever there. That lever will actually push on a leaf spring, and I guess that sends a signal or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but for anyone who does know, please feel free to throw in comment and chime in. Now one last thing before we move on that I did want to highlight is, if you'll notice on this gear, it's made it into the plastic pretty neatly, but you gotta remember it's plastic. I don't know how strong this particular plastic is, but over time there is a bit of force being exerted as you're turning this gear and as it's pulling onto the camera itself. So this plastic has to be pretty strong so that it doesn't strip from that gear there. This one looks fine. However though, on this side, if you'll notice the base there where the plastic meets the gear, there's almost like some lifting off already, as if the gear is beginning to either bind or strip away from the plastic. So that's definitely a cause here. One gear failure in itself won't necessarily be too much a problem, because it's these two in conjunction that adds torque to turn this screw. So if you had one gear failure, it's not the end of the world, but it does create undue pressure on the single gear that's left. So overall, it's just very poor design. Now here's DST's brand by comparison. Now again, I can't explain it to you because I'm not a plastic expert, but to me this plastic just does feel much more substantial than the Neewer brand. And that mating surface there is nice and neat. I know it's a little difficult to make out here on video, but to my eyes it definitely looks more substantial than say on the Neewer brand. And these gears, there's almost no play at all, but as I had mentioned, this is the one that failed because of that connector being held down by those prongs, and thus it caused the screw post to crack due to the undue pressure pushing upwards on that faceplate as you're removing this grip from the camera. And this was the leaf spring I alluded to earlier. As you can see here, as you tighten the lock, that leaf spring makes contact and does, I'd imagine, sends a signal or something, but again, don't know what it does. Feel free to throw into the comment if you do. So in closing, my thoughts are that for a aftermarket grip, it does offer great functionality, especially, over the original Nikon grip, but my main concern after taking it apart is this particular connector piece right here. As I had highlighted in the teardown section, it's held down only by 2 plastic prongs on either end, which is very flimsy, so such that when you're pulling this off the camera, because it does fit snugly, it applies a lot of upward pressure on this faceplate, which is only held down by these mainly 2 screws here, and that was exactly what failed on the DST brand. Aside from that, even the metal piece that was down here, that was also of a concern to me. Overall build quality isn't too bad aside from that, with the exception of over here, the rubber not mating directly to the base itself, as well as, like, say, the main and sub command dial. So quality, I would be rated like 2.5, even 3 stars would be generous. Probably rated 2.5 stars, 2 stars out of 5. Feature wise, 5 out of 5. And value, although of course the quality and features come into play together, probably rated 3.5, 4 stars out of 5. In the end, I would suggest holding off on getting this grip only because, as others had highlighted, you could get the same functionality of the app from, I think, like, there's certain freebies. I've never tested any of them, but I'll report back in the future if I do. And the grip itself, I'm sure there are better brands. Again, DST, with the exception of that connection piece right there, overall felt more solid, but still, I haven't found one yet that doesn't have this concern. I do have one more grip review lined up, although I don't really hold out high hopes because Meek brand historically, just based upon what I've read on the internet, it isn't that great either, so we'll see. But overall, sad to say, sorry Neewer, but it would be a very cautious recommend. Again, if you are determined to get this grip, as I had highlighted, as you're removing it, apply your pressure right here with your thumb. So as you're pulling the connector out, you'll help mitigate that upward pressure that's being applied on the faceplate, and thus these 2 screws, which aren't really all that strong, beefy anyway. So that would be my recommendation. But for now, I would say probably that's a hold or don't buy on this particular grip. For full disclosure, the SmartGrip app was purchased for my personal use. Thanks again for watching.